His Excellency is ready. And I'm guessing you can hear us. Okay, and you're also unmuted, so you have the floor. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome with a round of applause the Secretary General of the AfCFTA, Wamkele Mene.
Thank you very much, Program Director. First, let me apologize, a double apology, as it were, for not being able to join you in person. I would have wished to be there with you this afternoon, and also for the technical glitches over the last few minutes that we were hearing you, but we couldn't connect. We heard the raffle and the winners and the people who are yet to go to the moon. We heard all of that. Unfortunately, we were not able to participate at that time. Nonetheless, I'm very happy that we are able to join you in conversation at this year's Entrepreneurial Summit. It's a summit that is taking place at a time when the world is facing deep challenges. The geopolitical shifts that we see around the world, emerging out of an unprecedented global health pandemic. And really the question is, where does the African continent stand in all of this that is happening around the world? What is the impact of the shifts that we are seeing? How does Africa position herself in what appears to be very, very severe challenges? I will take this opportunity to offer some thoughts about the tools that may be available at our disposal as Africans to navigate our way through the crises that have been taking place over the last 2 years until now with the conflict in Europe. As you know, the African Continental Free Trade Area is now in full implementation mode. 44 countries have ratified the agreement establishing the AfCFTA. There's only one country that has not yet signed the agreement establishing the AfCFTA, but we have very, very strong political commitment from our leaders, and obviously the legal commitment is there because 44 countries have ratified the agreement establishing the AfCFTA, which means that these 44 countries have accepted the legal obligations, the obligations to eliminate barriers to intra-Africa trade, to eliminate barriers to intra-Africa investment, and a range of other constraints to boosting intra-Africa trade at law are addressed by the AfCFTA. It is, of course, early days. It is very early for us to say with a degree of certainty that in 2 years' time or 3 years' time, we will eliminate all of these barriers to intra-Africa trade and intra-Africa investment, even though we have started trading in earnest. Recall that it took the European Union precisely 72 years to reach this level of depth of market integration and this level of depth of connectivity of the market into a single market. And so we should understand as Africans that we will not be able to overcome almost 60 years of market fragmentation, almost 60 years of export of primary commodities to countries of the North, and almost 60 years of trade patterns that were deliberately designed to create a colonial economic model. And so the sense of urgency is, of course, understandable, but we must understand that we will require patience to see this agreement through and to see its benefits into fruition. So what is in the AfCFTA? And what does it offer you as an entrepreneur? It's a very comprehensive trade agreement, a very high ambition trade agreement. It covers the full spectrum of Africa's economy, trade in goods, trade in services, intellectual property rights, investment promotion and protection, digital trade, women and youth in trade, and competition policy. And the central objective is to make sure that we position our continent for 20, 30, 40 years from now to be globally competitive, to be a single market for movement of services, of goods, and hopefully at that point for movement of persons. The protocol on movement of persons is a side agreement. It is not part of the AfCFTA. It is very important, of course. Movement of persons are enabler for trade and business across the continent. And so we have got to get to a point where, as a continent, we enable the free movement of persons. Obviously, we're not there yet. And so recognizing the importance of free movement of persons and recognizing the reality that we are not there yet in practice, it is only a handful of African countries, 4 or 5 countries, who have ratified the AU's protocol on movement of persons. But in the absence of that, we have introduced in the protocol on trade and services of the AfCFTA, we have introduced a category of movement of business persons, which we hope is the first step that we will be taking towards a full implementation of the protocol on movement of persons. The AfCFTA shall require tools of implementation, tools that are intended to make sure that implementation is accelerated and that the benefits are accelerated. The first tool which I want to spend some time to talk about is the Pan-African Payments and Settlement System. As you know, our continent has 42 currencies. The cost of doing business, the cost of trade, the cost of currency convertibility is estimated to be around $5 billion annually. So if you are in Ghana and you want to trade with your counterparty in Egypt, you have to convert the Ghanaian cedi into the dollar. Your counterparty in Egypt will convert the dollar into the Egyptian pound. All of this costs the African economy $5 billion. And so working with African Bagg, we are in the middle of implementing the Pan-African Payments and Settlement System. The overarching legal framework, the regulatory framework, is the AfCFTA. And of course, our partner, African Bagg, is providing the technology as well as the liquidity that will be required for settlements. The idea is very simple: to eliminate reliance on third currencies when we want to trade amongst African countries. We want to make sure that trade is more cost effective, is accessible, and more importantly, that small and medium enterprises, young entrepreneurs, that the cost of currency convertibility is not a barrier to them accessing a new market outside of their region or outside of their country. The second important tool that we have introduced is the AfCFTA Adjustment Facility. We know that as countries eliminate or reduce barriers to trade, eliminate or reduce tariffs, that some countries will experience short-term revenue losses. And these short-term revenue losses can have a very, very significant economic impact. And so working once again with African Bagg, we are establishing the AfCFTA Adjustment Fund, which should be operational early next year, to enable those countries that do need the support to have access to the fund. The fund is intended not for budget support, but it is intended for productive sector interventions to ensure that a country that needs investment in capital goods to trade under AfCFTA, investment for retraining and retooling of workers to trade under the AfCFTA, that they have this facility to assist them. We're most grateful to African Bagg because already an amount of $1 billion has been made available. We will scale this amount. We have estimated that we will require $10 billion to effectively implement the AfCFTA, and we will work very closely with African Bagg and other partners to mobilize more resources. But this is an important tool for implementation of the AfCFTA because we know that there are countries who today may not have the industrial capacity, the export capacity that would enable them to compete under the AfCFTA. Ultimately, countries that may not have productive capacity now or industrial capacity now, the AfCFTA Adjustment Fund is intended to help them to achieve that objective in the shortest period of time possible. The other tool that is critical is trade finance. We all know the cost of trade finance, the inaccessibility of trade finance, the requirement for security, the requirement for collateral, and many young entrepreneurs starting their careers do not have this. And so we are mobilizing, working very closely with our commercial banks in Africa to make sure that a trade finance facility is established for trade under rules of the AfCFTA to provide preferential market access. But the easiest part for us is to achieve the market access through the rules of the AfCFTA. The most difficult part will be to ensure that there's trade finance available. I hope that in the near future, we will announce to you, we will announce to Africans, to entrepreneurs, to small medium enterprises, that working with a syndicate of commercial banks, that we now have a trade finance facility that will enable young entrepreneurs, small medium enterprises, to scale their businesses, to expand their businesses across the regions that they originally operate from. The other important tool of AfCFTA implementation is the Intra-Africa Trade Fair. The first edition of the Intra-Africa Trade Fair was held in Cairo in December 2018. The second edition was held in Durban, South Africa last November. We had tremendous success last November. The trade fair ensured connectivity of young entrepreneurs, of businesses. There were over 12,000 participants, over 1,200 exhibitors, and deals and transactions in excess of $35 billion. African Bagg, AfCFTA Secretariat, African Union will convene the next edition of the Intra-Africa Trade Fair next year in November in Abidjan, Cote d'Ivoire. And we hope that it will be as successful, if not more successful, than previous editions of the trade fairs. These are critical tools for implementation of any trade agreement, but more critical in the context of Africa, given the fact that over 60% of Africa's GDP is derived from small medium enterprises, creating over 450 million jobs, primarily creating jobs for young people. This is our focus as the AfCFTA Secretariat. The nuts and bolts of a trade agreement are very, very important. The nuts and bolts of a trade agreement are left to be developed by the trade negotiators in the room. But the work that is required, the additional work that is required to make sure that a trade agreement is successful, this additional work is embedded in these trade tools that I have mentioned. Where are we in the implementation of the AfCFTA? As I mentioned earlier, a trade agreement is not implemented simply by decree. It requires very difficult and challenging work. And so on the 7th of October this year in Accra, Ghana, we initiated what we call the guided trade, where those countries, those African countries, AfCFTA state parties who are ready, we have the customs systems in place, where they traded goods amongst themselves. This was a very important initiative because what it demonstrated is that the AfCFTA is actually alive. Goods were exported from Kenya to Ghana. I joined President Ruto in early October to export goods that were going from Nairobi to Accra. The following day, I was in Uganda. I joined the Deputy Prime Minister of Uganda, for export of goods that were going from Uganda to Zambia. 7 countries, Ghana, the island of Mauritius, Egypt, Cameroon, Tunisia, Tanzania, are some of the countries that participated in the guided trade initiative. And to give you an example of the benefits of the AfCFTA, the first example I would mention is the harmonization of customs systems. We are now generating one certificate of origin for the entire continent. Same process, harmonized process for import of goods based on the same rules. The second benefit is, of course, to consumers. The tiles that were exported from Ghana, that were manufactured in Takoradi, that were exported to Cameroon, the importer in Cameroon will receive a duty benefit, a duty reduction of 20%. That means that at a stroke of a pen, that importer improves their competitiveness as a result of rules, preferential rules for trading under the AfCFTA. The refrigerators, the air conditioners that were exported by Egypt, and similar examples. I mentioned this guided trade initiative to underscore the point that we have started trading under the AfCFTA. We have a common set of rules of origin for goods that are traded. We have an AfCFTA tariff book. And of course, as I've just mentioned, we have the AfCFTA certificate of origin. What we are expecting is that the rest of the state parties of the AfCFTA, the other countries who were not part of this guided trade initiative, will immediately implement the domestic regulations, the domestic rules, the domestic systems that are required to implement the AfCFTA. Ghana has done it, Cameroon has done it, Tunisia has done it, Kenya has done it, Uganda has done it. So other countries also have to introduce the customs systems at the national level to make sure that imports and exports of goods and services under the AfCFTA, that this continues. Why should entrepreneurs pay attention to the AfCFTA? Well, the simple answer is this. The AfCFTA, the value proposition of the AfCFTA is economies of scale, expansion of market. If your business is today operating in Ghana or in ECOWAS, you now have an opportunity to scale and expand to West Africa, to Southern Africa, to North Africa. Before the AfCFTA entered into force, your services, your goods that you were exporting were competing with goods from third countries, from Europe, from China, from other parts of the world. But as I've just mentioned in the example of the ceramic tiles, for example, you now are able to have a preferential access into AfCFTA markets. You will be more competitive in the AfCFTA market as a result of the rules of the AfCFTA. You will be more competitive than an exporter from a third country as in a country outside of the AfCFTA market. Second, for the very first time, the AfCFTA offers a single set of rules for trade, for investment, for dispute resolution, disputes that arise under the AfCFTA. We know that when we trade or through intra-Africa investment, we know that there will be disputes that arise. And so when these disputes arise, we have to apply rules. We have to apply common rules, harmonized rules for resolving these disputes. Before the entry into force of the AfCFTA, the African continent did not have a common forum or a common platform for resolution of trade and investment disputes. These disputes had to be adjudicated at the WTO, under ICC rules in New York, in Paris, in London. Now we are providing a platform for resolution of disputes, investment disputes, intellectual property rights disputes. To the extent that the dispute is covered by the scope of the agreement, we are providing a platform for efficient, cost-effective resolution of disputes that arise when trade does happen across the African continent. There will, of course, be challenges and there will be difficulties as we implement this agreement. What I have mentioned are the benefits that we stand to gain, but there will be challenges. There will be countries that will experience a balance of payments effect from time to time. There will be somebody who will wake up in a military barracks who is a soldier and decide that that day they want to be the president without being elected by the people. These challenges will happen. They should not deter us from the overall vision, which is integration of our market. We will have instability in some parts of the continent. We will have insecurity in some parts of the continent. And as much as all of these challenges will impact on our capacity to implement this trade agreement, they should not completely derail us from implementation and from the long-term vision that we have to make our continent more competitive. Let me conclude on a positive projection by the World Bank. The World Bank projects in a study published in 2020, in April 2020, that where we implement this agreement effectively, by the year 2035, the African continent has the opportunity to lift 100 million Africans out of poverty, to boost intra-Africa trade by over 80%, and to contribute to Africa's combined GDP by up to $450 billion. So these are very positive projections about what a trade agreement and this trade agreement potentially can do for our continent, how transformative it can potentially be for our continent. And so the challenge is not just on me, it's not just on those of us who are fortunate enough to serve you in the Secretariat of the AfCFTA. The challenge is on all of us as Africans to make sure that we make our own contribution to the implementation of this agreement, whether you are an entrepreneur or indeed a civil servant in a trade ministry. We are equally required to make sure that we implement this agreement. As I've noted before, nobody is going to uplift our continent for us as Africans. It is incumbent upon us as Africans to ensure that we have a continent in 20 to 30 years' time that is as globally competitive as any part of the world, that has regional value chains that are strong, that will withstand externalities, whether it is a public health crisis in the form of COVID-19 or a war that happens in another part of the world. It is up to us as Africans, and particularly this generation of Africans, to make sure that we see the benefits of integration and we see the benefits of a common market that are accrued to all. So I wish all of you very good deliberations for the rest of your conference. And once again, I'm sorry that I'm not able to join you in person. I hope I will be able to join you in person next year. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Secretary General. Well, the rest